So now we're going to take a dive into A Spoonful of Poison. Doesn't sound very pleasant, but that's the opening track. And the opening track opens with the lyrics. There it was rendered for me on the screen, the perfect version of myself, lifeless there, prismatic beauty, red, blue, green, and nothing else. That color system, that additive color system, to me it seems like that relates in some way to this landscape that you were talking about, where we have these orderly shapes and structures. Is there a significance to that red, blue, green additive color system, and or to the lifelessness of this perfect vision of the self?
I like everything you were saying just there. So good for you, Simon. Thank you for analyzing that and coming up with that. That's great. My thought on it is A Spoonful of Poison. I just kind of like this idea of it being like the first track is just kind of, I don't know, swallowing this like bitter thing. It's like, ugh, and it's like a perverse version of that Mary Poppins tune almost.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
anyway, I just like this idea of like eating this gross thing. But I also think the whole song is sort of about the various ways in which we kind of cope with our reality. You know, if it's weird drugs, or I think in the case of those opening lyrics, presenting some kind of avatar that's outside of yourself online. I think that's kind of a social media sort of thing. You know, the red, blue, green being like, I guess like a cathode ray screen. I don't think our modern devices use that anymore. I'm not sure about that actually, but just kind of that, I was thinking about like cathode ray tubes and kind of this artificial representation of a deeper reality.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think it's just kind of about that, just like what you do to cope. You know, if you've got like a social media presence you rely heavily on, or weird drugs, or if you're like a performer, whatever you do to cope. And it's like kind of this idea that even though we use it to help us along, help us in our day-to-day lives, it is poisonous. It's like kind of this irony that it's bad for you, but you need it in order to get through the day.
In the part of the song where we have the two references to spoonfuls of poison, we have kind of a contrast between two different ways of being or coping. One of them is, you know, focused on structure and constructing identity. That's kind of oriented towards order, but right at the beginning of the song, we're recognizing that this kind of perfectionism leads to a lifelessness. Mm-hmm. And then we have an alternative way of being or coping, the weird drugs, and so on, which intentionally tends towards disintegration in the moments when that strategy appears to be working. There are ego deaths and reveals for you. For all the weird drugs that I'll never do, the first individual was saying, there are ego deaths and reveals for you. This individual who is kind of oriented towards disintegration with the hope of experiencing liberation, there's a spoonful of poison in that individual's eyes that the first person doesn't experience. For every drunk tear that I'll never cry, there's a spoonful of poison in your eyes. And yet the first individual has this different spoonful of poison waiting for them.
Yeah.
So there's a poison that awaits for those who desire framing, like reassuring structure and to be in control of how things are framed. But the frame becomes a cage, and then that leads to a poison too. Were you conscious of opening the record with kind of like this image of two different possible ways of poisoning oneself?
No.
But it's
um,
there are these two different possible ways of
yeah, yeah, for
poisoning.
sure. I do think it's interesting that you kind of brought up the kind of framed, constructed perfection, and then it being like the first song on the album, and then contrasting that with the growth of the flower at the end of the album. I
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
felt like pointing that out, but I like that, and I think the branching paths that both lead one to harm is also kind of an interesting idea, and it is something that has kind of interested me in the past. Is there's this kind of inevitability that some damage will get done. This is something that like I think about from time to time, which it's kind of funny. Relates to a video game called Half-Life, which you may or may not have heard of. It's very popular.
Mhm.
But in the first Half-Life video game, there's like this part. It like really struck me. It was like odd. It was like one of those odd moments from childhood because you like I don't know, you like find this visual metaphor and it sticks with you. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but I just remember in this game there's like this hallway and there's some water on the ground and there's like an exposed electrical wire, so the water is electrified, and so there's no way you can proceed with the rest of the game without getting at least hurt like a little bit. There's no way to like get through this scenario without just getting damaged like a little bit.
Mm.
And I don't know why that stuck with me the way it did, but I just think it's kind of an interesting design choice, and I think it's like they probably weren't even thinking about it like that at all, but for some reason it really stuck with me, and I felt like it had some kind of deeper significance, that there's like scenarios like that where it's just there's nothing you can do about it. You're gonna have to get hurt a little bit to go
Yeah.
through, to go forward.
It's interesting though, in the analogy there with the game,
Mm-hmm.
if one's played the game before and is aware that that is the quandary, then it's possible through being aware, you take your spoonful of poison, but with intention and knowing that that's part of the growth narrative, to complete the game, to progress in the game. And for me, the fact that within this very orderly song, where the voice that we're presented with is conscious of the risk of tending towards lifelessness of its trajectory, there's parts of that character that recognize a value in the other choice. There isn't a dismissal of either. There isn't a complete outright dismissal of either as just like, here's the obviously bad thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting.
Hideous and wonderful, we fall apart all at once. So this is the same voice that at the beginning is celebrating the perfect version, structure. That same voice is the song ends with recognizing there's some beauty, perhaps, or something. There's something about the falling apart that is beyond just being what this voice wants to avoid.
Yeah, I think for me that line deals with performance, publicly displaying yourself, making yourself vulnerable, displaying your work or some inner piece about yourself. And I think that's also one of just like ways that one copes, but you open yourself up to all sorts of venomous conclusions should you choose to go that route.
For me, I feel like the record as a whole draws attention to, through its focusing on different patterns, cycles, habits. There's a whole cast of different possible poisons.
Sure.
And the record is quite committed to being aware of, with some hope that the awareness might be a catalyst or the catalyst that facilitates the growth that, at other times it seems impossible or difficult to see a way beyond the poisons. And that comes through, I think, we already kind of coupled betrayal and forgiveness together. And I feel like new possible poisons are introduced there in betrayal. You betrayed me, you betrayed me, you betrayed me, and I believed. There's something risky about the giving credence to the story of, okay, I've been betrayed here. That's the narrative. That's what's happened. You betrayed me, you betrayed me, you betrayed me, and I believed. I kind of read that as, and I gave total credence to that being 100% what happened. And then we're locked into these roles, if that's like the one story now. Is that happening? And how does this relate to forgiveness? We already put the two together. When will I find forgiveness for my own self-interest? Am I now bearing witness? Zooming out a bit from the focus on social media, if we just focus on kind of identity construction and wanting, the good side of that, I suppose, is, wanting to be responsible and feeling, a good way of thinking about this is wanting to be kind of held accountable for all the different parts of oneself. The opening lyrics of Forgiveness relate to what you were saying about the venomous conclusions that one could arrive at when one recognizes one's selfishness and reads the selfishness as bad. The bearing witness seems like a kind of true taking account of that which is from a perspective which is not as kind of tarnished by that which is, but doesn't ignore it. A different way of relating to it. So all that to say, we're kind of thinking about the song's betrayal and forgiveness in relation to one another, different ways of poisoning oneself, and the beginnings, I think, of the possibility through bearing witness in some way of a way that ultimately leads to something healthier than just taking poison.
Cool.
So that's what all comes up for me. What does
that all kind of, that makes sense to me. Betrayal, forgiveness, all of that. Bearing witness, removed objective voices from a scenario, kind of taking things in without judgment. I guess.
Taking things in without judgment is significant, I think. The possibility therefore of self-forgiveness or maybe self-acceptance.
Bearing witness to one's own self-interest, I think, is a significant thing. And to be able to do that without guilt or without judgment, to kind of do things for yourself, I think is an important part of this album as a whole, and an important way to grow.
Yeah.
Because I think you can act within your own interest, and I think you can do that without that being inherently harmful to yourself or to others, and in fact could occasionally be beneficial. Kind of selfless selfishness,
yes,
I suppose, is kind of what I'm getting at there. And there's lots of ways that one can be betrayed by themselves or by other entities, and I think the song Betrayal is kind of an outsized embodiment of that. I think there's a lot of melodrama in that song, which I think is fun to play with. I think that a big influence on this material is the band The Cure, and I think that something that doesn't necessarily always scan with artists is this way of wielding, of kind of towing the line between like comedy and earnestness, and being able to present an idea, because I think it's all a bit comedic presentation of one's like musical artwork. Like I think there's a certain comedy to it that I think is often overlooked, and I think like it's very like self-serious, but I think it can also be comedic. Yeah. So Betrayal is melodramatic and a little bit over the top, and I think it's in complete earnest, but I think there's also like kind of an element of comedy to it that I think is important, and I would like to kind of carry that through with the album and kind of with my work in general, because I think you have to have kind of a sense of humor about it and be able to laugh at yourself, and I don't think that has to underscore the seriousness of the piece.
A lyric that that's still in the first song, but that I think resonates with these two as well and throughout the record is gentle creatures pretend their stories honestly. So I think there it's like there's a sense of fiction making, creating stories about the self, which can be done gently and honestly. It's not necessarily poisonous, not necessarily leading to harm. Whereas in Betrayal, I live a lie, it helps me get by. The word lie is obviously, with the kind of melodrama, kind of wedded more to the self-recrimination, fiction making, this artifice, constructing something can help us get by, and that can be good. Whereas lying, it's just two different ways of thinking about what's going on here. We're witnessing, we're bearing witness to the construction of identity in different ways, stories about ourselves in different ways, coping mechanisms. And we're shifting between recognizing these strategies help us get by and then casting them as lying artifice.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of Forgiveness, there's a question, what is this for? And with that focus on kind of utility, usefulness, it kind of, that's interesting to preempt in Who Is Your Flower? It just hurts to feel so useless. What do you think about Forgiveness ending with this question, what is this for? And my reading of like the concern about usefulness.
So, I mean, I think that's like, well, what are we doing here? What is this for? If it's not getting better, if things aren't good, and I'm just, in just this perpetual state of everything sucks and just feeling sorry for yourself forever. Like, if it's not getting better, if you're not forgiving yourself, if you're not doing things that are constructive, if you're not actively making things better, then I don't know. What is this for? What are we doing? I think the other part of that lyric in Who Is Your Flower is I can't care if this is stupid. And I think that for me solidified the whole process of actually making the album and kind of became a mantra that I would repeat to myself about just making art in general to kind of combat the self-doubt that comes with it, because it's like I can't waste my time caring if this is stupid, if this sucks. Screw that. Like I gotta keep making this. I gotta keep working on this. Like it doesn't matter if this is stupid or not. I'm compelled to do this. So I think that kind of also deals with the utility, and I think that also deals with the line that you raised at the end of Spoonful of Poison about gentle creatures pretending stories, just presenting something, creating a story, some kind of artistic work that's outside of yourself, having some utility in that, finding the forgiveness in that, making it work, doing it guilt-free, no longer being held back by that concern of whether it's stupid or not.
Yeah, I love that.
I gotta do something about this. I can't care if it's stupid.
Yeah, this all makes me think of a couple of phrases from Nietzsche or Nietzsche, depending on how one wants to pronounce his name. But the untruth is a condition for life, and stupidity as a condition for life and growth are a couple of ideas from Nietzsche. So does that resonate? For me, there's this reflection on what serves growth and when does stupidity serve growth? When does fiction serve growth?
Yeah, I think that resonates. Yeah, it's just how to be better, how to feel better, how to make things better, how to make a marginal improvement. I think a lot of the specifics and the language employed make this album a very like deeply personal experience for me. But I think I'd like to believe that there's a broader appeal in that anyone who is hoping to overcome some kind of thing and kind of see some marginal improvement might attach somewhere.
Don't Cry for Me is I think it's a great first single. And by the time we get to this song, although we've just been talking about self-acceptance and to some extent self-love, here there's a possibility, we're bearing witness to when the self-love, when the investment in one's own story becomes poisonous through it being, there's no questioning, there's no suspicion of what one's present cycle is. We're in love with us and everything that we touch. If this is a crutch, don't push down too much. That's my favorite lyric, I think. This is the first of very many times where there's a focus on like up and down, the metaphors of up and down. Don't push down too much on the crutch. Do you have any reflections on, on those new components here? Those two components I've just highlighted, the self-love, like when can which types of self-love be detrimental or growth serving? When can self-love be that which breaks the negative cycle? When can self-love be that which perpetuates the negative cycle, different forms of self-love? And this really powerful image of the crutch. If it's a crutch, don't push down too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a certain light, as we've kind of touched on, is the whole album sort of, to me, functions as a bit of like a self-love spell, in that it's kind of lovingly constructing an effigy of everything you might not like about yourself.
Yeah.
And building it and then destroying it. But also recognizing that there is a continual effort in doing that, in that there is a cyclical pattern of doing that, and it's not just a one and done sort of deal. It's kind of a continual process that's kind of always happening.
Yeah.
And happens in its own way at various levels. But yeah, I think I'm hoping to take more of a macro step with the album, kind of using it as a vehicle for a larger personal change. With the Don't Cry for Me and that line, I didn't actually think about that like crutch with the up and down sort of idea, but that is an idea that's present throughout the album. And thinking about that aforementioned landscape that kind of describes all of the lyrics, very much there's a mountain in that landscape that I feel like one kind of ascends and descends and kind of continually deals with, and you go up there and you can get a view for what the landscape is looking like, and then change things and repeat that process. And I think there's like sort of like a humility in both the climbing and the descending, in like, I don't know, facing defeat or feeling victory and then finding other defeats. I don't know, there's a whole cyclical process of climbing and descending.
Yes.
That crutch line, I thought that was kind of a humorous line, honestly, but I'm glad it really connected for you. But yeah, I mean, also on a serious level, if you construct this self of yours and it's like this messed up version of everything you don't like, and you destroy it and it's gone and it's no longer there, maybe don't cry for it when it's gone. Be celebratory of that. I guess. I don't know.
Celebrate your achievement of intentionally shifting and identify with the self that is doing the exercising.
Mm-hmm.
Something that strikes me in Don't Cry For Me is that the character here is aware of the faith that others have in their growth, that they are on a growth trajectory. So you're in love with me and the person I'll be in a couple of months. Transitions are rough. This is interesting to bring into conversation with, the perfect vision of myself, lifeless there at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And the fact that someone else is in love with the growing Michael.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I don't know. I think that there is like a little bit of like an irony there or something, where it's like the person I'll be in a couple of months. I think, like, relatively speaking, that's a really short time.
Yes.
Like, change. Like, oh, I'll be a better person. Just check in a couple of months. I'll get all my stuff together. I'll figure it all out. Just give me like 2 months. I'm good.
So
but I think
there's a kind of generous poking fun at the naivety of this.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's fair. And I think maybe it's a little bit live, laugh, love of me to say, but it's kind of, be a better self every day. You get a little bit better every day. So it could also tie in there like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's a generous kind of poking fun, but with a genuine commitment to improvement.
Yeah, it's a good combination. I like those ingredients together. Dust, the next song after Don't Cry For Me, opens with a focus on a man whose skin is made of leather and he doesn't cry.
Mm-hmm.
And his bones are made of iron, so he could never fly. Mm-hmm. There's lots of references to flying and floating throughout the record. Floating comes in here too. She floats like dust. Kind of integrating more songs, kind of breaking away a little bit from like linear song by song. This is an awareness of the possibility of turning to dust, but then there is also the other possibility of living in dusk. That's from Old Souls, live now in the dusk. So how does that other contrast come into play? But various songs are either bearing witness to things turning to dust and or living in dusk.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm glad that we have broken from the linearity just a little bit, because I think that is in general something that's important to the album. I think I did try to make these references happen and kind
Yeah,
of have this cross-referential nature to
yeah.
the structure as a whole. So I'm glad that that's something that connected for you.
The songs
Um,
invite that. The way
sorry,
in which,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, the way in which, and that relates so even like to the layering from before. This is where the growth theme comes in, I think, through the interconnections that these songs invite. There are various linear patterns, all of which seem to be poisonous, and then we're breaking away from the linearity led
yeah,
by the record.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the songs were the lyrics were actually handwritten when I was working on them. I mean, and in various ways, you know, I'd write things down on my phone and stuff. I'm a man of the modern world, but I did have uh, like a scroll actually. I still have it somewhere, but I wrote them all down and I had them all on this same large sheet of paper. And I found that having that visualization allowed me to draw those connections easier as I was putting it together. And also, in a way, I carried it with me and I had it on my person, and I felt like I kind of lived with it and kind of like lived through it. And for whatever reason, like, I don't know, embodied a lot of things too. It became part of my existence in this way. So just thought that would be worth noting. But yeah, in terms of dust and turning to dust, yeah, I mean, I think that's another process of, yeah, disintegration, I suppose, of breaking down, of destroying something, of embodying something and living through it and becoming it and then destroying it. And so dust kind of just has this lyric at the end that's just like turns to dust, turns to dust, turns to dust. And I always pictured that with like asterisks by it. And I like old school, like AOL chat. I don't know if you ever did this, or I think even on like video games and stuff. If you were to like describe yourself performing an action, you would kind of write it in that sort of tense, and you'd put the
Rings a bell.
asterisk by it. You know, like gets out of chair or like grabs cup of coffee. So that, in my mind, is just kind of like that. It has the asterisk by it, and it's like turns to dust. It's like this weird action. With Old Souls, there's also a similar process going on, and that's also one of the songs that's like this one more so than the others has kind of an intentionality behind the tongue-in-cheekness of it. It's one of the more humorous ones, and I think this one is also just like on the surface very much just like kind of about vampires or like becoming a vampire.
Yeah, the
And I
vampire
don't,
into dust.
that's kind of like this beautiful, perfect creature that's also soulless and evil and
Hiding
messed
in the
up.
castle, free from any hassle. I only leave to feed. You know, that's obviously vampiric, but also
Yeah.
it made me think of the interior castle and the capacity to retreat from
Mhm.
being entangled in the whatever patterns are present. And so, you know, another dimension of what's happening there, I mean, there is this letting go, um,
Mhm.
letting the old husk die. In the song before that, in Trouble, that's where there's the explicit lyric about letting all your nervous habits fall away by the
Mhm.
wayside. So obviously, there's something ultimately growth facilitating about this, cultivating the capacity to let go
Mhm.
of of the habits that no longer serve one. for me, the recognizing the presence of something obviously is a prerequisite for being able to intentionally let it go. So I thought of that process when you were describing it a moment ago. Also in Trouble, this is the most that I felt I noticed right from the start that I had let some love melt down. So for me, if we have, or if once we're in the habit, once we've cultivated the habit of bearing witness, and then we kind of, each day make that be part of our identity, the bearing witness, through intentional habit construction, we become the person who's bearing witness. Then after some time passes, we just notice having let some love melt down. For me, that's a really significant moment in the record, and that's very tender. We have this kind of surprise payoff and this awareness, oh, I am growing actually. I can poke fun at myself at the idea of being a radically different person in 2 months. But if I just let go of that, but don't let go of the commitment to cultivating these life-serving, life-enabling habits, then ideally I have these moments of noticing having let some love melt down. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think it probably describes one who's really reserved and closed off, and having that frozen ice heart, and having it melt.
Having it melt. Obviously, one can't will one's heart to melt. One can't, the individual who's kind of trapped in, whose spoonful of poison relates to kind of the perfectionism and wanting things to have a certain order. It's going to be a challenge for that individual to go through the surrender, to embrace the surrender that enables the melting of the ice heart. But there are these moments, and that's one of them, where there's this kind of miraculous, perhaps, a recognition of, oh, I've let that happen. That has happened. It's something that I desired, yearned for, and it's happened, and I must have therefore let it happen. Yeah, something we should definitely zoom in on that comes through more in the final third of the record is the up and down, and specifically the mountain in Footsteps. If I turn around when you're climbing down, will I pick you up just to cut you off? And then at the beginning of Tiny Circles, I'm only climbing up to get a better view. When I reach the top, I know I'll climb down soon. So there's this awareness of the risk of if the story that one tells about oneself is I'm ascending, then there could be this kind of self-importance and grandiosity that can obviously get in the way of growth. Could you expand a bit more on this image of descending, meeting someone as one is descending, giving desiring for the person that one is meeting to not be kind of thrown off their ascent? Any reflections on the complexity of these up-down reflections?
I mean, I think if we're operating within the realm of that metaphor of the ascent being kind of a growth in self-awareness, or a growth in improvements to your life, or I think within that framework, I think that those words can be taken very literally. You don't want to hold someone back. I mean, you're on separate journeys, ultimately. Maybe it's someone you've journeyed with in the past. Maybe it's someone who's held you back. Maybe you've held them back in the past, but ultimately, I don't know. You don't want to hold someone back. They're climbing up. Let them go. Let them do it. Don't bother them. Don't mess them up. You got to do your thing. You got to let them do their thing. And we're all on our different little paths, I guess. That's how I'd interpret that.
These reflections emerge coherently in Savior Complex and Lion Tamer, where I feel like in both of those songs, where what we're bearing witness to is the risk of being overly protective of someone else, not respecting their journey. And so alongside that trepidation, there's a commitment to really honor and respect the metaphorical lion, and to not become the lion tamer. It makes me think of the song Ex-Lion Tamer. I don't know whether that's contributed by Wire. Yeah, where we have there's danger for there's a solitary figure in that song, an Ex-Lion Tamer. Is there some kind of conversation going on between Ex-Lion Tamer and Lion Tamer?
No.
We just like the song.
I think that's really funny because, yeah, I didn't actually, I mean, I started that song a long time ago. Lion Tamer has existed in one form or another for many, many years. And to some degree, I suspect I might return to it again, even at some point. But yeah, I mean, that song's taken on lots of different forms. So I started it before I was even aware of that song by Wire. So I don't think there's a conscious conversation between the two, though there could be. I think, yeah, I mean, I think that song, yeah, it's just kind of conversation between the lion tamer and the lion and being in the circus. And it's just kind of seemed like a pretty ripe topic to explore certain themes.
Yeah.
Or a right subject to explore certain themes. Just kind of interests me. Circuses are weird. Keeping this lion captive, and it's this like wild beast that certainly has the capability to tear you limb from limb. But somehow, even though it has this great physical power, the lion tamer still has power over it, still holds it captive, and is captivated by it. There's kind of maybe a mutual captivation, but then the whole thing is on this like public display too. There's just a lot going on, not necessarily even with my song, but just lion taming in general and the circus in general, that like my song could be about, I guess.
The play on words there with captivating and being held captive, and the way in which that goes beyond just being a play of words. There's definitely one last time bearing witness of the complexity of interpersonal relations, even if only and somewhat comically perhaps between like a lion and a lion tamer. It's a way of like using that as a way to ground some more serious reflection on codependency, the codependency of the lion and the lion tamer, and the possibility of something beyond that.
Yeah, that's certainly a reading one could take. And then also just the actual literal surface level interpretation of that particular relationship of like a literal lion and a literal lion tamer. So there's that, there's that smooth brain take too.
Yeah.
There's wrinkle brain, where it's a deep metaphor, and then there's smooth brain, where it's just straight up about a lion and a lion tamer.
Yes, good. I'm glad that you brought that in.
Smooth.
Smooth
yeah,
brain has an important role to play in this record, I think.
Say again?
Smooth brain and wrinkle brain are both welcome in this record of different
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's deep. It's metaphorical. There's truth, there's lived experiences.
Let's draw to a close with the same attention to the pair of songs at the end that we began talking about, Tiny Circles and Who Is Your Flower. And they're almost like, just like there was the choice of paths at the beginning, the 2 different poisons or 3 different poisons, it's almost like we have a choice of endings too. Endings is a theme throughout as well, beginnings and endings. And we were talking before about the once the bearing witness is enough of a habit, if we experience this moment of having let oneself soften. There's a not letting in Tiny Circles. We have the realization, yes, the world turns in tiny circles, my world does, and when it starts again, I won't let it spin. My world turns in tiny circles. Now I know it doesn't have to, and I don't have to turn them with you. So we have this, related to the bearing witness, the distance from the external patterns, the refraining from the kind of codependent perpetuation of a certain cycle, the commitment to being distant enough to kind of transform. Do you have any kind of final reflections on the ratio of letting, recognizing that one has let oneself soften, say, to commitment to not letting the circles spin, letting and not letting?
Yeah, I think that whatever I may or may not have been experiencing when I wrote those lyrics or created that song, I think now it's just a dog just going off. Sorry, it's distracting to me. But I think now I feel like there's maybe a certain arrogance in not letting these things happen. I think there's a certain misguidedness to saying, yeah, that's not going to happen anymore. Like, it's completely done. I don't have to deal with any of these issues anymore. But there's a hopefulness there. So it's hard to say. But I mean, I think the more realistic approach perhaps is just conscious awareness and attempts at stopping these things from spinning. So I mean, maybe there is a truth in both letting and not letting.
Yeah.
But I think the awareness is the most important part, and I don't think it's realistic that it's like it's done. But I mean, there's new circles to turn. There's new things to discover. There's new ways to grow. Everything's in flux always. Everything's changing.
I love
forever,
that.
Always.
Yeah. And having the one thing that's constant be the commitment to letting habits fall away when the time is right. I think that especially as we transition from tiny circles to Who Is Your Flower, for me, that's the emphasis that kind of wins out, perhaps born of the experience of noticing having let some love melt down. That emphasis resurfaces again in the old soul, the vampiric old soul, kind of referencing, kind of nod back to the song Old Souls there. This old soul will be less ugly. I'll be someone who can love me. The capacity to let oneself be loved by oneself and also by others. I'll be ready for your loving. I'll have someone I can show you. That's interesting. Being the confidence to kind of show up as the lovable self, as is an interesting kind of contrast to the acknowledgement that there's the expectation of the future self being lovable. Here's the confidence to, and the faith in oneself, the sense that yes, I am on this journey. So thank you for allowing that, for letting that be the end of the journey. You know, the record is too intelligent to be unaware that ends are an artifice, but there's enough faith in the possibility of growth, I think, for this return to the awareness, hard-won awareness of letting oneself be loved, of letting love in, be the end.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just a very convoluted self-actualization and self-love spell, really. I mean, hopefully that can connect with someone and they'll find it at the right time. Or they could just like look at a mural in someone's kitchen that says like, love yourself. You know, it's kind of its own version of that, maybe, the whole album.
Do you have any final words on the significance of the self-love spell being musical, taking the form of music that's constructed in this way?
Well, it's very personal, the work itself. And so, and for me, it's also a necessary expression. There is a compulsion to create and for me to expel this. So music is the medium that I am drawn to for whatever reason. I guess this work does have to be translated through that medium. I don't think that the same experience could be expressed via painting or photography or a dance performance or a movie. Yeah, it just feels like this is a necessary expression. It's very personal. Music is the medium I choose, and it feels like it's an inherently musical work. I don't think it could come any other way. I feel like it's I don't know, I mean, you feel when you make an expression and it feels like it's important to you and it's emotional. I think there is a physicality to those emotions, and this usually happens in like the heart chest area.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's something about like expressing it, kind of expelling it, kind of like singing it, belting it out.
Yeah,
there's a certain physicality to the expression that I think can only really be captured in this way.
that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I mean, in a way, the three different interconnected parts of the brain are all engaged with music. For me, that's increasingly significant. You know, if one were to just isolate the lyrics, you know, that's just like the analytical mind. You know, could get lost in the connections. That's something that's striking me more and more as I'm returning to these Back to the City interviews and thinking more about the medium of music. More regions of the brain are engaged through music than through just language on its own, because you beyond the lyrical component, you have like the reptilian brain would relate to rhythm, and then of course like the limbic brain, the feeling states are at play. And then if you have a complex enough, coherent, complex entity like spell, you know, if the spell has complex enough interrelated parts, it's really inviting the whole self to be present, potentially to then be transformed in a way that certainly language alone couldn't orchestrate.
Mm-hmm. Right on.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Cool.
So thank you for harnessing the power of music.
Yeah, you're
Fiddling
welcome.
and self-actualization, and also levity and fun.
Spending your time, decorating your mind with my jewelry.
That's perfect. I really love that.